Happy Friday, South Elementary Mustangs. It is our last reading of the week. We are going to start chapter 15 tonight, which is entitled The Forbidden Forest, and we'll do about the first half. So it starts out with kind of a cool picture around the name of the chapter with moths and butterflies. So let's read what is in the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. Things couldn't have been worse. Filch took them down to Professor McGonagall's study on the first floor, where they sat and waited without saying a word to each other. Hermione was trembling. Excuses, alibis, and wild cover-up stories chased each other around in Harry's brain, each more feeble than the last. He couldn't see how they were going to get out of trouble this time. They were cornered. How could they have been so stupid as to forget the cloak? There was no reason on earth that Professor McGonagall would accept for their being out of bed and creeping around the school in the dead of night, let alone being up the tallest astronomy tower, which was out of bounds, except for classes. And Norbert, and the invisibility cloak, and they may as well be packing their bags already. Had Harry thought that things couldn't have been worse, he was wrong. When Professor McGonagall appeared, she was leading Neville. "Harry!" Neville burst out the moment he saw the other two. "I was trying to find you to warn you. I heard Malfoy saying he was going to catch you. He said you had a drag—" Harry shook his head violently to shut Neville up, but Professor McGonagall had already seen. She looked more likely to breathe fire than Norbert as she towered over the three of them. "I would never have believed it of any of you. Mr. Filch says you were up the astronomy tower. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Explain yourselves." It was the first time Hermione had ever failed to answer a teacher's question. She was staring at her slippers, as still as a statue. "I think I've got a good idea of what's been going on," said Professor McGonagall. "It doesn't take a genius to work it out. You fed Draco Malfoy some cock-and-bull story about a dragon, trying to get him out of bed and into trouble. Well, I've already caught him. I suppose you think it's funny that Longbottom here heard the story and believed it too?" Harry caught Neville's eye and tried to tell him without words that this wasn't true, because Neville was looking stunned and hurt. Poor blundering Neville. Harry knew what it must have cost him to try and find them in the dark, to warn them. "I'm disgusted," said Professor McGonagall. 4 students out of bed in one night? I've never heard of such a thing before. You, Miss Granger, I thought you had more sense. As for you, Mr. Potter, I thought Gryffindor meant more to you than this. All 3 of you will receive detentions. Yes, you too, Mr. Longbottom. Nothing gives you the right to walk around school at night, especially these days. It's very dangerous. And 50 points will be taken from Gryffindor." 50! Harry gasped. They would lose the lead they had won in the last Quidditch match. 50 points each, said Professor McGonagall, breathing heavily through her long pointed nose. "Professor, please." "You can't. Don't tell me what I can and cannot do, Potter. Now get back to bed, all of you. I've never been more ashamed of Gryffindor students." 150 points lost. That put Gryffindor in last place. In one night, they'd ruined any chance Gryffindor had for the House Cup. Harry felt as though the bottom had dropped out of his stomach. How could they ever make up for this? Harry didn't sleep well at all that night. He could hear Neville sobbing into his pillow for what seemed like hours. Harry couldn't think of anything to say to comfort him. He knew Neville, like himself, was dreading the dawn. What would happen when the rest of Gryffindor found out what they had done? At first, Gryffindors passing the giant hourglasses that recorded the house points the next day thought there had been a mistake. How could they suddenly have 150 points fewer than just yesterday? And then the story started to spread. Harry Potter, the famous Harry Potter, their hero of 2 Quidditch matches, had lost them all those points. Him and a couple of other stupid first years. From being one of the most popular and admired people at the school, Harry was suddenly the most hated. Even Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs turned on him because everyone had been longing to see Slytherin lose the house cup. Everywhere Harry went, people pointed and didn't trouble to lower their voices as they insulted him. Slytherins, on the other hand, clapped as he walked past them, whistling and cheering. "Thanks, Potter! We owe you one!" Only Ron stood by him. "They'll all forget this in a few weeks. Fred and George have lost loads of points in all the time they've been here, and people still like them." "They've never lost 150 points in one go, though, have they?" said Harry miserably. "Well, no," said Ron. It was a bit late to repair the damage, but Harry swore to himself not to meddle in things that weren't his business from now on. He'd had it with sneaking around and spying. He felt so ashamed of himself that he went to Wood and offered to resign from the Quidditch team. "Resign?" Wood thundered. "What good'll that do? How are we going to get any points back if we can't win at Quidditch?" But even Quidditch had lost its fun. The rest of the team wouldn't speak to Harry during practice, and if they had to speak to him, they called him the Seeker. Hermione and Neville were suffering too. They didn't have as bad a time as Harry because they weren't as well known, but nobody would speak to them either. Hermione had stopped drawing attention to herself in class, keeping her head down and working in silence. Harry was almost glad that the exams weren't far away. All the revisions he had to do kept his mind off of his misery. He, Ron, and Hermione kept to themselves, working late into the night, trying to remember the ingredients in complicated potions, learning charms and spells off by heart, memorizing the dates of magical discoveries and goblin rebellions. Then, about a week before the exams were due to start, Harry's new resolution not to interfere in anything that didn't concern him was put to an unexpected test. Walking back from the library on his own one afternoon, he heard somebody whimpering from a classroom up ahead. As he drew closer, he heard Quirrell's voice. No, not again, please." It sounded as though someone was threatening him. Harry moved closer. All right, he heard Quirrell sob. The next second, Quirrell came hurrying out of the classroom, straightening his turban. He was pale and looked as though he was about to cry. He strode out of sight. Harry didn't think Quirrell had even noticed him. He waited until Quirrell's footsteps had disappeared and then peered into the classroom. It was empty, but a door stood ajar at the other end. Harry was halfway towards it when he remembered what he had promised himself about not meddling. All the same, he'd have gambled 12 Sorcerer's Stones that Snape had just left the room, and from what Harry had just heard, Snape would be walking with a new spring in his step. Quirrell seemed to give in at last. Harry went back to the library where Hermione was testing Ron on astronomy. Harry told them what he had heard. "Snape's done it then," said Ron. "If Quirrell's told him how to break his anti-dark force spell." "There's still Fluffy, though," said Hermione. "Maybe Snape's found out how to get past him without asking Hagrid," said Ron, looking up at the thousands of books surrounding them. "I bet there's a book somewhere in here telling you how to get past a giant three-headed dog. So what do we do, Harry?" The light of adventure was kindling again in Ron's eyes, but Hermione answered before Harry could. "Go to Dumbledore. That's what we should have done ages ago. If we try anything ourselves, we will be thrown out for sure." "But we've got no proof," said Harry. "Quirrell's too scared to back us up. Snape's only got to say he doesn't know about the troll or how the troll got in on Halloween, and that he was nowhere near the 3rd floor. Who do you think they'll believe, him or us?" "It's not exactly a secret that we hate him. Dumbledore will think we made it up just to get him sacked. Filch wouldn't help us if his life depended on it. He's too friendly with Snape, and the more students get thrown out, the better, he'll think. And don't forget, we are not supposed to know about the stone or Fluffy. That's a lot of explaining." Hermione looked convinced. Ron didn't. And boys and girls, here is a quick picture of what the house points look like. So there are little towers in the walls, glass funnels kind of that have the different colored points. They're almost like little sparkly marbles, and they're in the wall. And when you can walk by, you can see how many points Gryffindor has, how many points Slytherin has, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff. And so that's what the text meant when it said that they were walking by and thinking, how do we have 150 less points than just yesterday? Because they can see them. If we do just a bit of poking around. No, said Harry flatly. We've done enough poking around. He pulled a map of Jupiter towards him and started to learn the names of its moons. The following morning, notes were delivered to Harry, Hermione, and Neville at the breakfast table. They were all the same. Your detention will take place at 11 o'clock. Meet Mr. Filch in the entrance hall. Signed, Professor M. McGonagall. Harry had forgotten that they still had detentions to do in the 4 of the points that they had lost. He half expected Hermione to complain that this was a whole night of revision lost, but she didn't say a word. Like Harry, she felt they deserved what they got. At 11 o'clock that night, they said goodbye to Ron in the common room and went down to the entrance hall with Neville. Filch was already there, and so was Malfoy. Harry had forgotten that Malfoy had got a detention too. Follow me, said Filch, lighting a lamp and leading them outside. I bet you'll think twice about breaking a school rule again, won't you, eh? He continued, leering at them. Oh yes, hard work and pain are the best teachers, if you ask me. It's just a pity that they've let go of the old punishments and let them die out. Hanging you by your wrists from the ceiling for a few days, for example. I've got the chains still in my office. Keep 'em well oiled, in case they're ever needed. Right, off we go then. And don't think of running off. Now it will be worse for you if you do. They marched off across the dark grounds. Neville kept sniffling. Harry wondered what their punishment was going to be. It must be something really horrible, or Filch wouldn't be sounding so delighted. The moon was bright, but clouds scuttled across it, kept throwing them into darkness. Ahead, Harry could see the lighted windows of Hagrid's hut. Then they heard a distant shout. Is that you, Filch? Hurry up. I want to get started. Harry's heart rose. If they were going to be working with Hagrid, it wouldn't be so bad. His relief must have showed in his face because Filch said, Well, I suppose you think you'll be enjoying yourself with that oaf. Well, think again, boy. It's into the forest you're going, and I'm much mistaken if you'll all come out in one piece. At this, Neville let out a little moan, and Malfoy stopped dead in his tracks. The forest, he repeated, and he didn't sound quite as cool as usual. We can't go in there at night. There's all sorts of things in there. Werewolves, I've even heard. And boys and girls, here's a great picture of Professor McGonagall. Neville clutched the sleeve of Harry's robe and made a choking noise. That's your lookout, isn't it? Said Filch, his voice cackling with glee. Should have thought of them werewolves when you got into trouble, shouldn't you? Hagrid came striding towards them out of the dark, Fang at his heel. He was carrying his large crossbow, and a quiver of arrows hung over his shoulder. About time, he said. I've been waiting for half an hour nearly already. All right, Harry, Hermione. I shouldn't be too friendly to them, Hagrid, said Filch coolly. They're here to be punished, after all. That's why you're late, is it? Said Hagrid, frowning at Filch. Been lecturing 'em, eh? It's not your place to do that. You've done your bit. I'll take over from here. I'll be back at dawn, said Filch, for what's left of them. He added this nastily, and he turned and started back towards the castle, his lamp bobbing away in the darkness. Malfoy now turned to Hagrid. I'm not going into that forest, he said, and Harry was pleased to hear the note of panic in his voice. You are if you want to stay at Hogwarts, said Hagrid fiercely. You've done wrong, and now you've got to pay for it. But this is servant stuff. It's not for students to do. I thought we'd be writing lines or something. If my father knew that I was doing this, well, he would... Well, tell her that's how it is at Hogwarts. Hagrid growled. Writing lines? What's good that to anyone? You do that somewhat useful, or you'll get out. If you think that your father rather you were expelled, then get back off to the castle and pack. Go on now." Malfoy didn't move, though. He looked at Hagrid furiously, but then dropped his gaze. "Right, then," said Hagrid. "Now listen carefully, 'cause it's dangerous what we're going to do tonight, and I don't want no one taking risks. Follow me over here for a moment." He led them to the very edge of the forest, holding his lamp up high. He pointed down a narrow, winding earth track that disappeared into the thick black trees. A light breeze lifted their hair as they looked into the forest. "Look there," said Hagrid. "See that stuff shining on the ground, silvery stuff? That there is unicorn blood. There's a unicorn in there, been hurt badly by summit. This is the second time in a week. I found one dead last Wednesday. We're going to try and find the poor thing. We might have to put it out of its misery." "And what if whatever hurt the unicorn finds us first?" said Malfoy, unable to keep the fear out of his voice. "There's nothing that lives in the forest that'll hurt ya, if you're with me or with Fang," said Hagrid. "And keep to the path. Right now, we're going to split into 2 parties and follow the trail in different directions. There's blood all over the place. It must have been staggering around since last night." "Well, I want Fang," said Malfoy quickly, looking at Fang's long teeth. And boys and girls, we're going to stop there for tonight, but I will show you the front doors of the entrance hall picture where they met Filch, and you'll see Mrs. Norris there in the doorway. Okay, there's another great picture, but we're going to start tomorrow night, or not tomorrow night, Monday night, sorry, with the picture that will take us into the rest of chapter 15. So boys and girls, have a great weekend. Play in the sun. Tell your moms and your grandmas and your aunties and your ninas and every woman in your life that you love Happy Mother's Day, because Mother's Day is this weekend. Try your best to make it special for them, okay? And just keep being those wonderful little South Elementary Mustangs that we know and that we love. And we'll see you on Monday evening for more bedtime stories. Have sweet dreams.